Good evening. Welcome to the Newsmaker Interview Series here at Patrick Henry College. We are pleased to welcome tonight's guest. Michael Franzese was a former New York mobster and captain of the Colombo crime family who worked in the Russian mafia and sold millions of gallons of gas in the 1980s. According to a federal report, Franzese made more money for a crime family than anyone since Al Capone and was number 18 on Fortune's list of the 50 most wealthy and powerful mafia bosses. Since then, he has publicly renounced organized crime, created a foundation for helping youth, and works as a motivational speaker. He has spoken on more than 400 college campuses, addressed professional athletes with MLB, NBA, and NFL, and has been interviewed on ESPN, HBO, Fox Sports, CNN, National Geographic, Fox News, USA Today, and now he's visiting PHC. Please welcome Michael Franzese.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, let's start with what was the family business. I've read, as you wrote, that your dad said he killed a lot of guys, said getting rid of a body could be done by, I'm quoting here, dismembering the corpse in a kiddie pool and drying the severed body parts in a microwave before stuffing the parts in a commercial-grade garbage disposal, end quote. So when did you start knowing about what your dad did for a living?
Well, I kind of grew up in that. My dad was the underboss of the Colombo family back in the 60s. And I grew up in Brooklyn and Long Island, so my dad was extremely high profile. He's always was always a major target of law enforcement, had a tremendous amount of media attention. So, you know, I knew early on that my dad had a different lifestyle, obviously. And you know, he never sat down and told me anything, but it was really from what I observed because, you know, he was such a major target of law enforcement that I grew up with law enforcement around us all the time. He was under investigation from 7 or 8 different agencies, FBI, IRS, you know, Brooklyn DA's office, and they would all have cars parked around our house 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I knew my dad, you know, obviously was doing something other than, you know, being a businessman, but he never sat down and talk to me about anything. He tried to keep what was going on in his world outside of the house. So, but obviously I knew from an early age.
Okay, and your mom, how did she take all that?
Well, you know, my mom and dad, they loved each other. Obviously they were married and you know, she didn't like it. You know, we always viewed the FBI, law enforcement, really as the enemy. And unfortunately, I grew up hating them. I hated the government, I hated law enforcement, and it was because of what I witnessed. You know, my dad was my hero in life. I mean, I loved him very much. He was a great father, a great husband to my mother. So I always saw the, you know, law enforcement as trying to hurt my dad and harass our family. So my mother viewed it kind of the same way.
Okay. You as a teenager were not involved with that, but it was in 1975 when you actually were inducted into the Colombo family?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, my dad, he originally didn't want this life for me. He wanted me to go to school and be a doctor, actually. And I was on that road. I was a pre-med student at Hofstra University in New York when my dad got in some very serious trouble. He was indicted several times, twice in the state, once for grand larceny, once for homicide. He went to trial and was acquitted in both of those cases, but then in 1966, he was indicted in federal court for masterminding a nationwide string of bank robberies. He was supposed to have, you know, developed this scheme to create these bank robberies. And went to trial, got convicted, and in 1967, they sentenced him to 50 years in prison. It was the longest sentence given for a bank robbery conspiracy case up until that time. In 1970, he lost all his appeals, and they shipped him to Leavenworth Penitentiary in Kansas to do his time. And like I said, I was a pre-med student, but I was devastated when my dad went in. He was 50 when he went in. I figured add 50 on top of that, he'd never come out of prison alive. So, you know, just as an aside, today my dad's 98 years old. He's done over just about 35 years in prison since 1970. He's been in and out 5 times on parole violations, and he always got violated for associating with other criminals again. And but right now, my dad's back in prison at the age of 98. He's the oldest federal inmate in the system and is the oldest made man in America. My dad's been part of that life for just about 66 years. He goes back to Frank Costello and Luciano. He's kind of a legend in this life. So, that's the background. Joe Colombo, who was the boss of my family, he kind of took me under his wing when my dad went away. I started to meet a lot of his friends. They were saying, Mike, what are you doing going to school? If you don't help your father out, he's going to die in prison. And Marvin, I'll tell you this. I asked my dad about this. I said, Dad, bank robbery? And he looked me in the eye and he said, son, I'm innocent of these charges. I'm not a bank robber. I didn't know the witnesses that testified against me. He said, the government framed me. And that's all he had to say to me. I believed him because my dad never lied to me. And from that point on, I was on a mission to try to help him get out of prison, which I eventually did after 10 years. But I looked at, I said, I don't want to go to school anymore. If I don't help you out, you're going to die in here. And I visited him in the, Leavenworth in the visiting room. And he was upset. We argued about it back and forth, but I was a headstrong kid, and he knew my mind was made up. And he said, son, if you're going to be on the street, I want you on the street the right way. In his mind, the right way was to become a member of his life. So he said, go home, somebody will be in touch with you. Just do whatever you're told. And he proposed me for membership into the family at that point. I was 22, just about 22 years old. And should I continue? Or?
Well, let me ask I started out with that quotation about what was said to be his practice. Did you think at that time that he actually had murdered people?
Well, look, I got to be honest, and this is difficult for me to say, especially with the young people around. I have a heart for young people. I have 7 kids of my own, and now I have 4 grandchildren, and they all came in bunches. The oldest is 3, and I had 4 in 3 years. But so I never want to be misleading to anyone, but I also like to tell the truth because it's important that people understand where God has brought me in my life. My dad asked me that day, he looked at me and he said, I want to ask you one question. And I said, what's that? He said, if you ever had to kill anybody, could you do it? And, I was never asked a question like that. And I thought about it for a minute. And I said, Dad, if the circumstances were right, I think I can do it. And he said to me, well, that's the right answer. So based upon that, my dad had a reputation. Obviously, I knew he was part of that life. And so I understood that, he did things that, according to that life, you had to do at that time. And, so I had made up my mind that, number one, I wanted to please my dad, and I wanted to help him out. So that's the route that I chose.
And just one other question then before we get into that induction. 1972 is when The Godfather, the movie, came out.
Yeah.
Very popular.
Very popular.
Did you see it at that time?
Oh, absolutely.
Loved it. And what did you think of it?
I loved it. I thought it was great. I still love it. I watch it almost every time it's on. Godfather 1 and 2.
Right.
3, forget about it. They
not
lost
3.
Don't even think about that one. But, that movie kind of changed. It had an effect even on the guys on the street. Mm-hmm. They started dressing differently. It was an amazing impact because it gave, it made that life like very glamorous. And people on the street ate it up, and it changed the whole impression that people had up until that point. Because, Marlon Brando played a dignified mob guy, and it made a difference. And Michael, the same thing.
Well, yeah, you're Michael, and you're watching a movie with Michael Corleone, yeah, who is a straight arrow initially. I mean, he's a war hero. He goes to college and so forth. I mean, did you identify with him?
I didn't. A lot of people say to me, you're like Michael Corleone. I said, no, he's like me. I'm the real thing. He's fiction. But no, I didn't think of it at that time because I was really very determined to help my dad. That was my mission in life at that point in time. So, I mean, I love the movie, but it was on to the real thing for me.
Gotcha. Okay, so Halloween night, 1975, is when you actually joined the Colombo family.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, I was in kind of a pledge period. You understand that, for about 1.5 years, where I had to do anything and everything I was told to do to prove myself worthy. Prior to that, what happened was when my dad sent that message home, after I left Leavenworth, about 2 weeks later, a captain in the family picked me up, and that's a rank in the family, and took me to see the boss. And Joe Colombo had been shot and seriously wounded. He eventually died from the wounds. A new boss took over. His name was Tom DeBella. Tom has passed on now, and I sat with Tom. And he said, Mike, I have a message from your father. He said, you want to become a member of our life? And I said, yes. He said, well, here's the deal. From now on, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're on call to serve this family, the Colombo family. And that means if your mother is sick and she's dying, and you're at her bedside and we call you to service, you leave your mother and you come and serve us. From now on, we're number one in your life before anything and everything. They said, when and if we feel you deserve this privilege, this honor to become a member, we'll let you know. And so I was in a pledge period really for about a year and a half, almost 2 years, where I had to prove myself worthy. And I had to do anything and everything I was told to do that.
And what were you told to do?
Well, a lot of things could have been very menial. There's a lot of discipline in that life, a lot of alleged respect, a lot of authority. You had a meeting at 8 o'clock. If you weren't there at 7:30, you were late. You can never be late in that life. Drive the boss to a meeting, sit in the car for 5 hours. God forbid you leave to go to the restroom or get a newspaper, and he comes out and you're not in the car, you're in trouble. I know, I did that once, and I paid for it. So a lot of stuff like that. And listen, again, I got to be really honest with you. That life at times is very violent. And if you're part of the life, you're part of the violence, and there's no escape. And if anybody tells you differently, they're not being honest with you.
Right
And
now,
so,
go ahead.
no, it's, I had to do what I had to do to prove myself.
Well, what did you have to do to prove yourself besides sitting for 5 hours? I just mentioned this because apparently FBI agents scoff at your claim that you didn't have to kill anyone as part of the initiation.
Well, listen, when the FBI is questioning me at one time about things, obviously I took a different position when I was part of that life, In that life, you don't admit to anything. That's just it. You never admit to anything. But now, I'll say things really because in terms of my faith, I want people to understand that at one time I was a bad guy. I was living in sin. I was violating God's laws and the laws of man every day. And if that meant that it was an act of violence where somebody had to get killed, you do what you have to do. And, you're required to do that. And I could have said no and walked away, and maybe I would have suffered consequences on my own. But, the way I looked at it, I want to be clear on this. When you come into that life, it was something very special to me at that time. Why? I viewed it as this brotherhood among guys. I didn't think anything was more special or powerful than this brotherhood. I got your back, you got mine. They said, wherever you go in the world, Michael, you'll have somebody there to back you up. Don't ever worry about your mother, your sister, your daughter. Nobody will ever hurt them while we're here. It was very powerful for me. You're also told, hey, we have policies and we have rules. You got to obey the rules. And if you don't, you may pay for it with your life. And if your best friend violates the rules, he'll pay for it with his life, and you may be called upon to do it. So you look at it in terms of, okay, ground is level, we understand, we got to play by the rules, and you kind of justify it in that way. And that's how I looked at it, and I tried my best, to play by the rules at that point.
Okay. And so then what were some of your other your activities there? You did some loan sharking?
Yeah, traditional. I had a big gambling operation. That's one of the reasons why I speak at all the colleges. I speak with all the student athletes about the dangers of gambling, because I had 13 bookmakers working for me. Bookmakers are taking bets illegally on the street. And they were working for me. We had a lot of athletes gambling with us, and some of them compromised the outcome of the game. Shylocking money, lending money out at usurious rates. I got into that. But I also had, legitimate business. I had 2 car agencies at one point in time. I had a movie production company. I had a leasing company. I was very aggressive on the street. And fortunately, Marvin, I knew how to use that life to benefit me in business, and I went on to make a lot of money. But I also had, other illegal activities. I had this whole gas tax scam, I would say, where I was defrauding the government out of tax on every gallon of gasoline. I was a gasoline wholesaler at the time. And that was, according to the FBI and according to everybody else, the biggest money earner in that life since Al Capone, and obviously it was.
How did that work?
Well, we basically, I devised a scheme to collect the tax, which at that time was 9 cents federal and 25 to 30 cents state and local, depending upon where you were located. So you had just about 40 cents a gallon. And as a licensed wholesaler, I was able to get the licenses. I had 18 companies that were licensed to collect tax. And at the height of my operation, I was selling 500 million gallons of gas a month, and we were taking down 20 to 40 cents a gallon. So do the math, it was a lot of money. At one point in time, we were bringing in $8 to $10 million a week. And I ran that operation for about 7 years before, things changed in my life. But getting back to, because I think this is important, the night I got made, or straightened out as we called it, it was Halloween night 1975 when I got the call, and it was myself and 5 other gentlemen. It was very late at night. It was a catering hall in Brooklyn, and this is a very solemn, secret thing, so the FBI, you had to make sure there's nobody surveilling us or whatever, so a lot of work and effort goes into that. And the 6 of us were there. We were called into a room individually where the boss was seated at the head of like a horseshoe configuration, the underboss and the consigliere to his left and right, and all the captains alongside of them. It's like a horseshoe. And I walked down the aisle, stood in front of the boss, held out my hand. He took a knife right here, cut my finger. Some blood dropped on the floor. This is a blood oath. I cupped my hands. He took a picture of a saint, the Catholic altar card, put it in my hands, and he lit it aflame. It didn't hurt. It burned quickly. It was merely symbolic. And he said to me, "Tonight, Michael Franzese, you are born again into a new life, into La Cosa Nostra, which means this thing of ours." And he said, "Violate what you know about this life, betray your brothers, and you will die and burn in hell like this saint is burning in your hands. Do you accept?" I said, "Yes, I do." That's how it started.
Okay. The gambling aspect of it, as far as throwing games, shaving points, how did that work?
Well, look, back then, athletes, it's kind of a normal extension of their psyche. They like to raise the stakes on a competition, so many athletes are gamblers. And people surrounding the game. And so, if we had athletes gambling with us, and we did, and they couldn't pay the bill, because a lot of them, honestly, they're not good gamblers. They gamble with emotion. They don't gamble right. And a lot of them got into us for a lot of money. So, what I would do is a bookmaker would call me up, and these were, from Mets, the Jets, the Yankees, and a lot of New York teams, and a lot of teams around the country. And he'd say, so-and-so is into us for 25 grand. He lost all that money. What should I do? Should I cut him off? And I said, "Why would you cut him off? All you're doing is writing that entry on a piece of paper." I said, "Let him get into you for 250 grand and then bring him to me." And so these athletes would get in trouble. They couldn't pay the bill. They'd come and see me. And my usual game was, "Hey, you owe me a lot of money. You owe me 100 grand, 150 grand. How are you going to pay?" "Well, I don't have that kind of money." I said, "I'll tell you what, I'm going to do you a big favor. I love your team. I like the way you play. You don't have to pay me today, but I'm going to charge you 5% a week on the money. You give me 5 grand a week until you can pay it off, and then we're okay." They couldn't pay that kind of money. So what happens, they want to do anything to get out of the room. "Oh, okay, I'll pay whatever you want, no problem." They're gone. 5, 6, 7 weeks later, they have to stop paying the VIG, or the juice as you call it, and they can't pay anymore. Now they come back to me. I said, "Where's my money?" "Well, I don't have it." And I said, "Well, you got a rich uncle, you want to rob a bank, you got to do something, because you're going to pay me. You're not going to walk away." And I said, "But I'll tell you what I'm going to do. If you can't pay me, I'm going to do you a favor, okay? Tomorrow night, let's say it's basketball. Tomorrow night, you're favored to win by 10 points. Don't win by 10. Win by 6, win by 7, win by 5. Because remember, it's not about winning or losing. It's about the point spread. That's it." I said, "You do that for me 10 times, I said, we're even. Don't worry about it." And unfortunately, they did it. They didn't have a choice.
And of course, in the early 50s, there was a huge college
Boston
basketball,
College.
Boston
Yeah.
College.
Henry Hill.
But this really didn't come out in at that time in the 70s, right? Or did it?
Oh, there was a lot of scandals, but no, I never got in trouble for
Yeah.
this. No, Henry Hill was the guy with Boston College, and I was very familiar with that, but that got out of hand.
Well, I grew up in Boston. I'm a Red Sox fan, so I'm glad to hear that the Yankees were involved in this in some way.
Well, I'm a diehard Yankees fan, so we may have to discontinue this interview right now. No, I'm only kidding.
We'll try to. Let's all try to get along.
I don't know if you know, but Boston's in last place right now. But anyway.
But only a game behind 4th place. So it used to be in baseball that there were 10 teams in a division. You could be in 9th or 10th place. Now the worst you can be is 5th place. This is America.
That's true.
So,
that's true.
Okay. Also, you were a partner with a booking agent, and I read here that your goal was to. This has been already in 1980, 1981. Your goal was to intimidate existing and prospective clients. How did you intimidate them?
Well, we had an agency where we represented a lot of the top black music artists at the time. And we had some, Marvin Gaye, and I was involved in the Michael Jackson Victory Tour back in 1984. We had really the top black artists we represented for their tours.
Okay.
And what would happen is, the guy that ran this operation for me, a guy by the name of Norby Walters, oftentimes, one of the managers would say, we want to switch agents. We don't want to be with you guys anymore, or with him anymore. So, I would pay him a visit, and I'd say, listen, I would appreciate it if you stayed with Norby, for another year or so. And it's not so much intimidation, but, when they know who you are, you don't have to really threaten people, because it's just the idea that, hey, if I don't pay attention, something wrong can happen to me. So
They had watched The Godfather also.
I'm sure they did. I'm sure they knew it. An offer they can't refuse. That kind of thing. But,
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned here about managers. I mean, these are big names: Michael Jackson, Dionne Warwick, and so forth.
Dionne Warwick. Yeah.
Okay, and then you have the sports management agency. You, according to this description here, that you were involved in frightening college athletes into signing management contracts with him. How did that work?
Well, I was partners in that. I wasn't really involved in that because that all occurred while I was in prison.
Okay.
But what was going on is we were signing college athletes before their eligibility date, which was against NCAA. It was a big violation. But what we would do is we would give them some money and have them sign a post-dated contract. And we'd hide it in a drawer and say, when you're out of college, then you belong to us. We'll represent you. But I went off to prison at that time, and the guy, when athletes left, he started threatening them with my name. And that's how this whole thing blew up into a huge case in Chicago that I had to be involved in because they were using my name while I was away. And, but that was it. He was threatening athletes that wanted to leave him. He was threatening with Michael Franzese. And even though I was away, it was kind of effective at times. But then they ran to the FBI, and it was a whole big case out of Chicago.
Okay, now the other thing that's happening here that's hugely important in your life is you meet Camille, who now you've been married to for 30 years.
That's correct.
Where did you meet her, and how did that develop?
Well, among many things I was doing, I'll set the table for this. In 1984, they had promoted me to captain in the family. I was a captain, and that's a very powerful position. By the way, in that life, you have a boss, an underboss, a capo regime, or captain, and a soldier. And there is a position called consigliere. Robert Duvall played that role brilliantly in The Godfather, but it was fictional in The Godfather, because in order to be a sworn made member of that life, your father must be Italian. Mom can be of another descent, but your dad must be Italian. So I had risen to the position of captain, and here's where I am in 1984. I'm a captain in the family. Honestly, they were grooming me to be either the boss or the underboss. The boss had a son. He and I came in, we were around the same age, and our fathers, my father was the underboss, his father was the boss, they were grooming us to take over the family. Boss, underboss, whatever way it worked out. I became a major target of law enforcement. Excuse me. I was indicted 5 times. I went to trial 5 times. I beat every case. I beat Rudy Giuliani. I was the first major mob guy he indicted under the RICO statute in '84. I was a lead defendant. I had 15 co-defendants. And I was on trial for 7 months. And Rudy had told me in the courtroom when I was getting bail, he gave me $1 million bail. He said, if I convict you on this, you're going to get double what your father got. You're going to get 100 years. And that's the kind of time they were giving mob guys in the 80s. 100 years, 150 years, it was crazy. And I'll never forget, Marvin, I stood toe-to-toe in the courtroom, and I said, hey, Rudy, bring it on. I beat you guys 4 times already. Let's go for round 5. And I always say that's probably the dumbest thing you could ever do. You don't antagonize them anymore. They don't need more incentive
Now,
to come after you.
what did it take to beat him 4 and then 5 times?
Well, I kept going to trial, and I was acquitted or dismissed in every case. I mean, they just couldn't convict me.
The witnesses then would not testify?
No, they
against you?
testified. We went to trial, and, they brought charges against me, and, I had grand larceny charge, I had, all this kind of stuff, and I just kept winning. We worked hard, and we beat the cases. And the Giuliani case, I was acquitted in that case after a 7-month trial. I was on trial in federal court for 7 months. My co-defendants, some of them got convicted. They got 30 years and up. If I lose that case, he'd have given me at least 50. I wouldn't be here today.
Well, let me ask. I mean, you were declared not guilty in court, but were you
Not guilty.
Were you guilty?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
The Giuliani case, I should have never been indicted. And he just, his method, he figured he'd throw enough against the wall and it would stick. But it was a bad case against me. It really was. But, listen, these racketeering cases are extremely hard to defend. Very, very difficult. So, most of the time you lose. You win that case, it's a blessing. Again, I worked so hard, day and night with my lawyers for a year in advance. We prepared for this, so we were ready for it, and we just put on a better defense than they did. So I was innocent in that case. I really was. I should have never been indicted. But again, a year out of my life, millions of dollars to defend myself, another 7 months on trial. I mean, it takes a lot out of you. Even when you win, you lose. So, so I beat all those cases. Honestly, I'm bringing in $8 to $10 million a week. I got my own jet plane. I had a Lear 25A. I had a helicopter. I was flying around in a helicopter. I had 2 yachts. I had a house in Florida, a house in Marina del Rey, California, and a house in New York. And I had about 300 guys under me ready to, do anything I tell them to do. I had organized all the Russian mob guys in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn. They were all in the gas business with me. So I had it really, going on. I was 31 years old and, top of the world, Ma, at that point. But so among many things I'm doing, I'm making movies. I had a production company in L.A., and Smokey Robinson was a dear friend of mine. He came to me with a screenplay for a breakdance movie. A lot of music, a lot of dance, a lot of rap music, back in the 80s. But that's when you can listen to rap music on the radio, not like this stuff today. Forget about this stuff today. But back then it was cool. We had the Sugar Hill Gang, Run DMC, Curtis Blow, the Fat Boys, old school rap. I like that stuff, right? They were all in my movie. Yeah, it was great stuff. Yeah. So I said, Smokey, I'll make the movie if we can film it in Florida. I had a house down there, and I like the warm weather. So we're filming it in Florida. It's called Nights of the City. I think you can still rent it on video. And so I bring in cast and crew from L.A. to work in the film and 50 professional dancers to dance in the film. And I had everybody staying in a hotel in South Florida. And we had just wrapped pre-production, and we were going into principal photography that Tuesday. It was a Sunday, so I kind of threw a barbecue in the back of the hotel for everybody. So everybody was around. We were just chilling. And I was sitting there minding my own business, by the pool, talking to a couple of guys. And all of a sudden, out of the water came this gorgeous 20-year-old girl, right? I saw her, everything went in slow motion. It was like a Pepsi commercial, right? I saw her and I said, wow, who is this girl? And she looked like a dancer to me. She had kind of a dancer's body. So the choreographer was sitting around the pool. I said, hey, Jeff, come here. He comes over. He says, that one of your girls? She says, oh, yeah, that's mine. I said, what's her name? He said, Camille. I said, bring her over. I want to meet her, right? Figured, big shot producer, she want to meet me. So she comes over. I introduce myself to her. I said, Camille, I'm your producer. I want to get to know you better. I want to take you to lunch. She says, sure, no problem. Sweet, polite, gorgeous, right? So we set a time and a place, and I had one of these restaurants on top of one of the hotels. I had everything set up, right? She's going to walk in. I'm going to impress her, sweep her off her feet. No problem, right? She's mine. I'm up there 15 minutes, a half an hour, 45 minutes later, she stood me up, right? Never showed up. And I couldn't believe it, right? So I see her on the set the next day, and I said, hey, what happened? You didn't show up. You know what got me, Marvin? She never made an excuse. She looked at me like, did you really expect me to come? So she kind of put me on the spot, 20-year-old kid. So I said, well, can we try it again? Were you busy? She said, yeah, I was rehearsing. I said, well, can we try it again? It's my movie. She's rehearsing. Can't get mad. I said, okay. So she said, sure, let's try it again. We set another time and a place. I go. She stood me up again. Now, she did this to me 5 times. Now, Marvin, if she was sitting here, she'd roll her eyes and say, stop exaggerating. It wasn't 5 times. I was the offended party. I wasn't used to rejection. Guys, we know when we're rejected, right? Trust me, it was 5 times. She would always say yes, didn't want to have anything to do with me, right? But she had me. So now, I want to tell you this. I have 5 daughters, okay? And my youngest now is 17. They're all of the dating age. 2 of them are married. I want to tell you, and I told them this, and I'm telling all you young ladies this. You want to get some knucklehead guy, play hard to get. Don't make it easy for them. I tell my daughters, guy invites you to lunch, he pays. I'm old school. You don't double dutch. I don't want to hear any of that stuff. Guy wants you, he's got to take you to lunch and all of this. And they say, Dad, you're old-fashioned. Listen, they don't care about the mob stuff. I'm just Dad. Take out the trash, gas up my car. They don't care. You wear your pants too short. You listen to Frank Sinatra. I get harassed in my house, right? And but I get even with them. They bring their boyfriends over to the house. Says, hey, come here, you. I'm not from L.A. I'm from Brooklyn. Let me tell you how you're going to treat my daughter. And I scare the hell out of them right off the bat, right? Girls, you say, Daddy, don't come to my school. All the guys are scared of me. And I say, well, behave and I won't come, but okay. I tell all these fathers and grandfathers, you're not Italian. Okay, you got a teenage daughter. Speak with a Brooklyn accent, put a vowel at the end of your name. It really works. They think you're mobbed up. They get scared, right? But anyway, she don't have anything to do with me. One night we're having a cast meeting, and she's coming out of the meeting, and she's with a couple of her friends, because I always had my eye on her now, and she was upset. I said, oh, this is great. Tailor-made for me. I got to fire somebody, get rid of somebody. I'm in, right? So I go and see her, and she finally starts to talk to me. I said, Camille, what's wrong? You look upset. She says, Mike, I got to go home. She tells me she's from Anaheim, California. She used to dance in Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm. She had no clue what she was getting involved with me. And I said, well, what do you got to go home? She says, well, you know, my mom and dad, I've never been away from home this far. It's 3,000 miles away. She said, there's some things happening on this movie set I don't really agree with. And, you know, that was a wild set. I mean, music, dance, young kids. I mean, it got a little crazy. But I'm saying to myself, well, you're a dancer. What's the big deal, you know? But then I'm thinking about it. We used to go to some of the clubs, and we used to hang out. She would never show up. One or two friends, did a rehearsal, back to the room. She really kept to herself, you know? And so I said, well, what's the big deal, you know? And she said, well, I forget how she put it. She said, I'm a believer, I'm a girl of faith, or I'm a Christian, or something like that. I said, I'm Catholic. We got something in common. Let's talk, right? Anything to get to know her better. You know, so I got to make a very long story short. I fell very much in love with this young woman. She's now my wife of 30 years. And there's no doubt that she was the catalyst that God used to lead me to the Lord. No doubt.
Good, then how did that happen?
Well, you know, she starts to hang out with me on the set. We start to know each other a little bit. Great. So we wrap the movie, and she says, Michael, she's very close with her mother. Very, very close. Every day, 10 times a day with her mother. She says, you got to come home and meet my mother. No problem. I'm great with moms. Let's go, right? We jump on a plane. I go meet her mom. Marvin, her mom, Irma, was the most godly woman I ever met in my life. You meet Irma for 2 minutes, your name goes in her prayer book. She had a prayer book like a telephone book. I'm not kidding. And the name's in the book. She didn't have to know your name. If she saw you and she thought you needed prayer, you're in the book. The boy I saw on the street corner with one shoe, I'm not kidding. The delivery boy that came to the house. The woman used to sit on her little porch and she would pray, a prayer warrior. And, you know, so I'm looking at this woman saying, wow, you know, Jesus really means something to her. And, you know, she never hit me over the head. She never preached to me. But she just lived her life like, I just never seen anything like that before. And Camille, too. You know, Camille was young. She was a dancer. She liked it. But the Lord meant something to her. So here's what's happening. I'm around this girl, and I'm starting to fall in love with her. I said, man, I love this girl. And I wanted her in my life. But I'm saying my life is a direct contradiction, everything these two women believe. When they really know who I am, how is this going to work? They can't accept this. They're for real. And I wasn't buying into their faith. I mean, I'm a mob guy, and I'm a Catholic, and I wasn't a practicing Catholic, but I respected the way they believed. And I said, it's not going to work. So here's what happens, Marvin, and this is, to me, this is the God part. I realized that if I wanted her in my life, I had to make some changes, okay? And the reason I told you where I was when I met her, I want you to understand this. It was never on my radar screen ever to walk away from my life. I'm my father's son. I'm a mob guy. I'm going to be the boss. This is who I was from birth, practically. It's who I was. But all of a sudden, my love for this young woman is becoming stronger than this lifelong love and bond I had with my dad. It's becoming stronger than this blood oath that I took to La Cosa Nostra. And that's a serious oath. Now, you know, I say, how do you explain this? I'm going to be honest, she wasn't the first beautiful woman I met in my life, but there was something different about her. And now, 30 years later, and the way my life has turned, there's no doubt that something was God. And I know God put her in my life. And I tell her that. I said, you were a plant. And she says, and you're darn blessed that I was. I said, yeah, okay. She's very snappy with the answer. She comes right back, right? But, so now, you want me to keep going?
Yeah, keep going. Okay, so when did you get married? 1985? Is that?
Got married in 85.
85. And let's see, you went to prison then in when? Which year?
Well, here's what happens, Martin.
Yeah.
You know, I can't just say, hey, guys, I'm resigning. You know, you can't do that. Obviously, I can't walk away from the life. So I had a plan, always had a plan, right? And they were going to indict me on this whole gasoline case. I just beat Giuliani's case. I knew they were preparing this case in the Eastern District of New York, the feds, on this gas place. So I had a plan. I said, I beat them 4 times already. They were dying to get a conviction on me because I had a lot of press and these acquittals don't look good for the government. So I said, I got some leverage. So I told my lawyer, I said, look, I want to take a plea. I want to plead guilty. I want to get all this stuff over with. I want to wrap everything up. I'm done, right, with that. So I figured I'd give him some money. I would marry Camille. I'd do a couple of years in prison. I'd move out to the West Coast. When I get out of prison, I'd have parole and probation. When you're on parole, you're not allowed to associate with any criminals or anybody with a record or known organized crime people. So I said, I can use that as an excuse. I'll move out to the West Coast. I'll use it as an excuse not to meet the guys. I can't get violated. And maybe after 10 or 12 years, they'll forget about me, and I'll live happily ever after with Camille on the West Coast. That was my plan. It had nothing to do with God, nothing whatsoever. And so that's it. I married Camille in July of '85, and in December I get indicted, and I take the plea. I got a 10-year prison sentence. Back then we still had parole. I figured I'd do 4 or 5 on the 10, manageable. I had a $15 million restitution, $5 million in forfeitures of my assets. I had to give up my plane, my helicopter. I said, take everything. I don't want to be with this girl. And I go off to prison. And they send me to Terminal Island in California. And I want to tell you this, Marvin, I really mean this. I'm really not the main story here. My wife is the story. This girl was 21 when I married her. She had no clue, but she saw The Godfather once. She thought it was a great movie. There's no mafia out in L.A. We call them the Mickey Mouse guys out there. They have nothing out there, right? So she didn't know anything about the mob, nothing really. And I never, until today, until this very moment, I have never sat down with my wife and talked to her about anything particular about my former life. She doesn't read any of my books. She doesn't watch any of the documentaries on me. Nothing. She don't want to know. She says, I lived enough. I don't need to know any of that. That's how she deals with it. And I'm not comfortable talking with her about it. I just don't do it. It's just who I am. So, I brought so much baggage into that young girl's life. She didn't have a clue. And she will tell you, she said, look, I love my husband, but if God wasn't in the foundation of our marriage, I wouldn't have made it through. And, because I do 5 years in prison. During that time in prison, without getting into the whole thing, it becomes public that I'm walking away from the life. Mm-hmm. And Life magazine wrote a huge article about me quitting the mafia, and it was very bad. I was in jail with, 15 other mob guys. They locked me down, and then something happened. This whole case that came out of Chicago, I had to make a choice. And I kind of formally said, I'm done with the life. And everybody thought I was going to become a witness and join the government and enter a witness protection program. I never was going to do that. I wasn't looking to hurt anybody. But the government, came to me in prison, the FBI, and they said, Franzese, you're a dead man anyway. Words all over the street. Persico's got a contract on you. Your father went along with it, and he did. And, come with us. We'll put you in a witness protection program, preserve your life and that of your families. I didn't want to do that. I said, guys, I'm not interested. I'm not going to hurt anybody. And they didn't take no for an answer. They gave me a very tough time in prison. Marvin, they moved me to every prison in the country. I'd be there for a week. They'd ship me out in the middle of the night, send me somewhere else. My poor wife would come and visit me. I wasn't there. She had no clue where I was. It was a tough, tough time they gave us. But we got through it. We got through it.
So since you can't really walk away from it, mm-hmm. and you didn't join the witness protection program, and there's some speculation that the millions and millions from the gasoline stuff, you were able to pay them and pay them off that way? No?
No. Listen, some prosecutor, Ed McDonald, my prosecutor, they interviewed him because nobody can understand why I'm still alive. Nobody gets it. And so they're trying to figure out all these ways. So, he was interviewed once and they said, how is Franzese still alive? Contract on his life. His father betrayed him. He's got people looking for him. He's living out in the open. How's he still alive? And the guy didn't know what he says. Well, maybe he's giving them $10 million a month and they're letting him stay alive, And so they interviewed me about that. And I said, this guy's been a prosecutor for so many years and he still doesn't know what's going on. I said, they would have taken my $10 million and killed me anyway. He said, you don't walk away from that life. What people don't want to understand is this. God had a different plan and a purpose for my life. Marvin, there's no blueprint telling you how to walk away from that life. Mm-hmm. I didn't know how it was going to work out. But I also learned that God never throws you in the fire without preparing you for something. Now, I spent 20 years in that life at a very high level. I knew the mentality of the guys. I knew what they would do. I knew what they wouldn't do. Now, one of the real horrors of that life, and I got to tell you this, is that you might be in trouble. Your best friend walks you into a room. You don't walk out again. And unfortunately, I've seen too much of that in my life. So what I said, okay, you're not walking me into any rooms. I move out to the West Coast, okay? It's one thing to walk you into a room. It's another thing to send a hit squad out to kill you and then get away with it. And especially to somebody that is knowledgeable. I didn't put a house in my name. I didn't put any utilities in my name. I was ready to move around if I had to. And, you know, I was prepared. I knew what the guys wouldn't do. And I changed my whole lifestyle. What do I mean by that? I haven't been in a club in 28, 29 years. Bad place for me. I know who hangs out in these places. I'm pretty well known. You know, one wise guy sees me. He wants to be a big shot in New York. I walk out to the parking lot. Boom, I'm gone. I don't walk my dog at 7 o'clock in the morning every morning, so if somebody's scoping me out and they want to, you know, I don't create patterns in my life. I don't go to the same restaurant every Tuesday night and sit in the same seat, because I know how these guys work. So, you know, I've changed my lifestyle, and I'm going to be honest with you. I just outlasted everybody. Everybody I know in that life is either dead or in prison for the rest of their life. And the only answer to all of this, I don't thumb my nose in their face. I don't sell them short. These guys are very capable. But I know with all my heart that God had a different plan and a purpose for me. There's no other real answer to this. And trust me, I'm not giving. If I had that kind of money, I wouldn't give it to them anyway. I'm telling you right now. They'd have to come and try to get it. So, no.
Okay. Go to your questions in just a moment, but just let me ask then, when did you make the final move, actually, in terms of a public profession of faith, baptism, and so forth?
Well, what happened was when I got out of prison, I was on parole for 13 months. And honestly, Marvin, the worst time of my life. Literally dodging bullets. My wife was so scared because the FBI put it in her head that I was going to get killed. And
well, let me just ask a question from it. Literally dodging bullets. I mean, did anyone ever come after you?
Oh, yeah.
And actually shot at you? And
No, I got shot at when I was in the life, not when I
Right.
got out of the life. But there was people out to hurt me. And I mean, the FBI came to me. I came home one day when I was on parole, and there was 3 agents in my house. My wife was crying her eyes out, and they told her, if your husband doesn't leave here by the weekend, he'll be dead. There's people out here to hurt him. I had to pick everybody up. We went to Palm Springs for several days until they told me that, you know, the threat was over. And I've gotten a couple of these calls. And so I'm dodging bullets. I can't put a house in my name. I can't get a job. I couldn't earn a dime. You know, everything was very, very tough. And so one morning I told my wife, Sonny, I'm going to the bank. When I come back, we'll have breakfast. And I go to the bank. I walk out, 15 agents. They slapped the cuffs on me, went into the bank, leaned all my bank accounts, drove my car away, went to my house with a search warrant, cleaned us out, went into my wife's purse, took every penny out of there, and told her, this is racketeering money. You don't work. It's your husband's. We're indicting him on a new case. We're violating his parole. Quote, your husband will never see the streets again. And she was devastated. I thought I was going to lose her at that. She couldn't talk to me for over a month. She was so devastated. If her mom wasn't such a supporter of mine and really loved me, that woman, she's passed away now, but I loved her very much. I believe she prayed me to where I am. But she really held up my wife and said, you married this guy, you got a commitment, let's see, God has a plan, and she pumped her up. And but they threw me in that 6x8 cell that night because they told me, we don't want you to cooperate anymore. They were fed up with me because I wouldn't cooperate. And that night in that jail cell is when I really had my come to Jesus moments. And they gave me 4 years. The racketeering case fell apart. They never were able to indict me, praise God. But they gave me 4 years on the violation. I spent 35 more months and 13 days in prison. 29 months and 7 days, and I can tell you how many hours and minutes in that hole. 6x8 cell, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just me and God. And it was during that time that I want everybody to understand this. I didn't come to God easily. I challenged God because I didn't believe. I said, you know, I put my faith in my Father. I took a blood oath. Look where it got me. I said, if you're really God, this Bible is truly your word, written by men but inspired by you. And if Jesus is our risen Savior, I said, you got to prove this to me. I want to see the evidence. And obviously, my life, I think in terms of evidence. And all I can tell you is this, two things. In that 3 years that I spent in that hole, I must have read, only God knows how many times I read my Bible. If you see my prison Bible, there's more in my notes than there is scripture. I know my Bible. I had over 400 books sent in. I read every faith that you can imagine. I studied and I studied and I studied everything. I had a Sony Walkman. I used to listen to Pastor Greg Laurie, who is now a dear friend, and the wonderful way he interpreted scripture. And I came out of there believing, not beyond a reasonable doubt, which is our standard of proof in our criminal justice system, but beyond any doubt that the Bible was God's word and that Jesus was my risen Savior. The evidence was too powerful for me. And that's when that's when I really professed my faith. Now, I got baptized when I came out. I wanted to get baptized right away. And then what happened after that, I never in a million years thought I'd be speaking. None of this. I didn't plan any of this, Marvin. And I want you to understand this. I'm talking, I really am a pretty humble guy because I don't claim any credit for anything that I do. And I will tell you this. I know beyond a doubt that if God didn't have a different plan and purpose for me, I'd either be dead or in prison for the rest of my life. And you know what? That's what I deserved. That's what I earned. I spent 20 years on the street every day in violation of both God's laws and the laws of man. I can't sugarcoat it. I made that decision. My father didn't push me into it. I didn't have an addiction. I was a knowing and willing sinner. And if God can do what he's done in my life, my purpose now, I believe, is to be an encouragement to everybody to understand if God can turn my life around, who at one point was the worst guy in the room, then he can do it for anyone. And I'll tell you this, Marvin, I'm very sincere about my faith. I love the Lord because I know what he's done for me and what he continues to do for me on a daily basis. There's no doubt in my mind about it.
So that prison cell was good for you?
Saved my life in that cell. Had I been on the street, I would have never accepted him. I was too much a product of that life, too much I thought in control of myself. I had to go through that time. And I believe God said, you know what? I didn't put you here. You put yourself here. But I'm going to use this time because I wouldn't get your attention on the street, and I'm going to get it here. And I'll tell you, prison is fertile ground for God to do his work because God does his best work when we're at our lowest point. And that first night in the cell, I just wanted to die. I was first time I experienced hopelessness. And that's the worst emotion you can have. It was a horrible, I hate to even think about that night. I was so broken. And I want to lay my head on a pillow and not even wake up because I couldn't think of the future. I said, man, I'm 39 years old. I'm going to spend the rest of my life in this cell. I'm going to lose my wife. How's she going to wait for me now? They can't put me on a yard. I said, I got everybody looking to kill me. I'm going to spend the rest of my life in a 6x8 cell. And I'll tell you this, if I didn't have God in my life and I didn't have that hope, I would not have done well. I saw a lot of guys in solitary that didn't do well. We were not meant to be solo creatures. That is difficult, to be isolated like that 24/7. And if it wasn't for God, I wouldn't have come through it like that, no doubt.
Questions?
Yes? No.
When we read about the cartels, specifically the Mexican cartels in the news, and we look at some of the horrible crimes they commit, sometimes you wonder if those guys are really thinking, if they're consciously thinking about rejecting natural law or God's law, and they're just kind of thumbing their nose at it, or if they're genuinely in the dark and totally confused about life. From your perspective with the Italian mafia, in your experience, did a lot of the guys, were they aware and they were consciously deciding to sort of thumb their nose at God's law, or did they really just think that all there was to life was getting by?
We weren't intentionally thumbing our nose in God's face, no. I want you to understand something. Murder in that life was taken very seriously, very, very seriously. It wasn't a random thing. We didn't go outside the life. We weren't killing people on the outside. It was a very, very serious thing. The only person that could approve a murder in that life was the boss. And there was a lot of discussion about it. And you had to you had to do something to do it. It wasn't random. It was taken very seriously. So, but here's the thing. When I came into that life, and this is the way most of the guys think, we thought it was an honorable thing. Hey, we're men. We're taking an oath. And we're saying and we're agreeing that if we violate that oath, what were some of the violations? One, you don't ever, ever violate another made member's wife, sister, mother. You ever abuse a woman and you're dead. That's it. And I'm going to tell you this, and I say this, I get choked up. My best friend got killed, was murdered because he was having an affair with my sister while he was married. Murdered. I mean, and it killed me, and I couldn't save him. And it broke me. It really did. So, but that was taken very seriously, okay? You couldn't fool with drugs. If we dealt with drugs, we died. That was it. No drugs in our life. And I'll tell you the truth, personally, I hate anything to do with drugs. My sister, after this guy was murdered, a short time later, she overdosed on heroin. 27 years old, dead. My brother's been a drug addict for over 25 years. My kid brother right now, he's not a kid anymore, he's in his 50s, got himself in trouble, drug addict 25 years, got himself in trouble in 2009, made a deal with the feds, went undercover as an informant, and cooperated against my father. And he's the reason my father is back in prison. My father's son, my brother, testifies against his own father. He's in the witness protection program. I haven't seen him for 5 years, 6 years. And so we considered this an honorable thing. You know, you do the right thing, you stay alive. You do the wrong thing, you're going to pay for it with your life. So it had nothing to do with God. We thought it was justifiable under God's law because we were doing the honorable thing. Is it wrong? Absolutely. There's no way to really justify it, but that was the mentality back then. We were not thumbing our nose. As a matter of fact, a lot of guys, if you went down to Little Italy on Ash Wednesday, Catholic, you'll see most guys with ashes. I mean, they would go to church on Sunday. Sometimes they'd go definitely Christmas, definitely Easter. They thought they were doing the right thing in that regard, but we thought we were doing an honorable thing. But it's wrong, and I will tell you this too. I want everybody to understand this. This is what I tell these gangbangers. I talk to a lot of them. The mob life, the gang life, it's an evil life. It's evil. It's the enemy's got jurisdiction over that life. I'm not calling the guys evil, because I was one of them. I'm just blessed, and I think many of them would want to be in the position I'm in. Okay, but the life is evil because I don't know one family, not one family of any member of that life, including my own, not my wife and kids, praise God, but my brother, sister, mother, that hasn't been totally devastated. I mean devastated. My mother, 33 years without a husband when she died of cancer. My sister dies of an overdose. My brother overdosed in the witness protection program. My younger sister, 42 years old, died of cancer, had a horrible life. My father, 35 years in prison. You wouldn't want his life in the last 50 years of his life. He's seen everybody dear to him dead. Me and him are the only ones left. And it's true of everybody I know in that life. And any life that is that destructive to families and people is evil. And that's how I view it. Yes, sir. No, you need the mic. Yeah, I can hear you.
Sorry. Okay.
I think of a mafia as being New York, New Orleans, Las Vegas, big cities. Is there mafia influence in small towns, for example, Montgomery, Alabama?
I don't, I mean, there could be pockets of things, but, the biggest area of that life is obviously New York. You have 5 families in the New York, New Jersey area. And, in my time in life, we had 750 made men, guys that actually took the oath that comprised all 5 families. And then we had a lot of associates, guys that were around but weren't actually made. They didn't take the oath. So that's the hub, that's the center. Chicago has a big family. They call it the outfit, but it is a big family. Kansas City, Tampa, Florida, New Orleans, places like that, Youngstown, Ohio. But, we spread out. I mean, there might be 1 or 2 guys in another town. I never heard anything in Montgomery, Alabama, but that doesn't mean there can't be. But our influence was nationwide, no doubt.
So past tense, what about present tense?
Well, yeah, that life is still going.
So, okay.
The government did some real damage, back in the 80s and 90s, but they're building up again. They're still there. They're not going to go away in my lifetime, that's for sure. Yes, sir.
2 questions. One, since 1992, the government's put in place a lot of anti-money laundering legislation and enforcement. Do you think that's made a difference, or has it always been one step behind the criminal element? And the second question would be, tell us about your grandchildren.
Okay, the money laundering doesn't affect guys like us at all. The money laundering affects Wall Street, okay, not us. Because a lot of guys dealt in cash, and you know, when I was in the gas business, I was wiring millions out of the country anyway. And there's some really unique methods of bringing it back in, which I'm not going to educate anybody about right now. So it really didn't affect us, you know, honestly. I mean, look, the movie I made, you know, I spent $2-something million, and it was all gasoline money, but nobody knew it at the time. So no, that didn't hurt us in any way. My grandchildren, you know, the love of my life. I mean, my 3-year-old, she's the oldest, little Olivia, and what they say about grandchildren is the truth. It's the reward we get for having children, okay? And them putting us through crazy stuff. But they're great. And I got 3 boys, 1 little girl, and then another girl on the way. So I had 4 in 3 years, and now another one. So they're great. They're great.
Your father, now 98, what does he believe?
Oh, my dad, he's, you know, he's old school, still very cantankerous. As far as him, he's concerned, I never left the life. You know, I'm still part of it. And, you know, he said, you'll come to your senses one day. I said, well, maybe. I mean, that's how he looks at it. But, you know, he's mellowed out a lot. You know, he's went through so much, you know. And look, my dad betrayed me, 1,000%. I mean, I know it for a fact. He did go along with the contract. He did, you know, have a hand in trying to set me up. But I have an issue with my wife over this, because she says to me, you know, she's nice to my dad and all that, but she said, you know, how can you have this loyalty to your father, you know? And she doesn't understand. I said, honey, you don't get it. She says, no, I don't, and I'll never get it. I said, you know, my dad was in a tough position. Nobody knew if, you know, if you bring somebody into that life and they start testifying, well, you could be responsible. My dad could have been in trouble, and that's one reason why I would have never done that. And I said, he was in a tough spot. I understand. He still loves me no matter what. And I love my dad. And we had it out. You know, I said, Dad, I know what you did. He denies it. You know, you deny everything. I said, but Dad, don't worry about it. It's okay. I get it. I love you. I don't love you any less. Now, my dad and I have had some issues because, you know, when my mother passed away, she told me some things that were upsetting to me. And so I don't visit him as much as I should maybe, but it's not only for that. I am so burnt out on prisons. I've either been in prison or visiting prison since I'm 5 years old, constant, my entire life. And, you know, the visit with him is so tough now because he's in a wheelchair. You know, he's 98 years old, and he's got phlebitis in his legs, so he can't really walk that well. And every 20 minutes, he's got to use the restroom. You know, he's 98. You know, in a prison, when you're an inmate, you don't just get up and go to the restroom. You got to raise your hand. They got to come and get you. It's a whole process. They lock you up, and then they got to bring you out. So most of the time, I'm sitting in there alone. And I said, Dad, you know, please forgive me. Let me just try to get you out of here. I just put in for a compassionate release for him. He fits all the criteria, but he never wins anything. So I don't know if it'll happen, but we're trying. Maybe I can get him out of there. But I'll tell you, my dad, he was a little down the last time I seen him. And, you know, my mother passed away, and he just was down, you know. And I said, hey, what's the matter with you? He said, nah, Mike. He says, you know, my son testifies against me. What do I got to live for? I said, hey, let me remind you of something. You remember what happened the day you got sentenced? So he kind of perked up. The day he was sentenced, he gets sentenced to 50 years in prison, right? So Judge Jacob Mishler, he says, Mr. Franzese, you got anything to say? He said, yeah, Your Honor. I'm going to fool you and everybody in this courtroom. I'm going to do the whole 50, right? So now, 2017 is the whole 50. So I said, Dad, you remember what you told that judge? He said, darn right. He said, I promised I'm doing that 50. I ain't leaving here until 2017 because I gave my word. I never break my word. So, but I want to tell you this. The judge is dead. The prosecutor's dead. Everybody in the case is dead except my father. He's the only one alive. I think he's going to walk out of there. I really mean it. I really mean it. I want to tell you something else. I'll tell you how significant God has been in my life. Because this is really what's important about this. The mob stuff, it was what it was. I walked away from that life in 1995. Everybody predicted my death. Everybody. Life magazine wrote a huge story. If he holds to what he has promised, he'll mark the first time a high-ranking member of the mafia will publicly walk away from his past and live. That was in 95. Ed McDonald, head of the organized crime strike force, went on national TV when I was released from prison. Quote, "I wouldn't want to be in Michael Franzese's shoes. I don't think his life expectancy is very substantial." Ed was very diplomatic, right? Bernie Welch, the FBI agent, followed him to the podium that same day. He wasn't as diplomatic. He said, quote, "Franzese will get whacked." And for those of you that are not from Brooklyn, I think you know what it means anyway, right? Whacked. That was in 1995. In 1975, when I walked into that room Halloween night, there were 6 of us that night. I'm the only one alive today. Not one of those men died of natural causes. Every one of them was murdered. We had a big war in our family in 1991 when I was in jail. They were all killed. Want a little more proof that when God's got a plan and a purpose for you, nothing will stand in the way? 1986, Fortune magazine wrote a huge article, 50 biggest and most powerful mob bosses in the country. It was half the magazine. They featured 6 of us. I was one of the 6. And they actually had a chart with the 50 of us on there according to rank and wealth and power. And I was number 18. I was the youngest guy on the list, and I was 5 behind John Gotti at that time. And I always say, Marvin, don't ask me how they make a list like that. They didn't ask for our tax returns, right? It was all nonsense. It just sold a lot of magazines. It didn't mean anything. But here's what is significant about that list. Today, out of that list of 50, 29 years later, 44 of those men are dead. 3 of them are doing life in prison without parole. And honestly, my goal in life, and I'm here for one purpose, for you all to understand, and that's to give praise and honor and glory to my hero, my Savior, Jesus Christ. Because when God's got a plan and a purpose for you, no mob, no sickness, no death, no addiction, nothing will stand in the way of God fulfilling his purpose in your life. And if I'm anything, I think I'm evidence of that. We broke all the odds because when God's got you back, you don't worry. I mean it.
Amen.
Thank you. We good?
Yeah.
I'm not in a hurry. I mean, if you want to go, if not, you got more questions. You want to know where Jimmy Hoffa's buried? That's normally the first question. Where's Jimmy Hoffa buried?
Okay, we'll extend this a little bit. Any other questions? Here.
Yeah, I was thinking, with all the government-funded gambling and things like that, has that eaten into the mafia business?
No. It was the late 70s. We got off-track betting in New York, OTB. I remember the cops coming to me and saying, we're going to put you guys out of business, okay? Now we get legalized betting on horse races. I said, let's see what happens. What happens when you go to OTB, okay? You got to put down your money. They don't give you credit, okay? So what happens is people would go to OTB, they'd put down their money, they'd start to lose, and then what do? They come back to the bookmaker, okay? Because we gave them credit. Yeah, no problem, give me credit. Our business went up. Okay, because now guys were losing money there, they had to come to us to try to make it up because there was more people gambling than there was before because now they had access. You could do it. It's the same thing that's happening today. You cannot believe how many college students are in trouble for gambling, not only student athletes. I visited over 300 universities, mostly Division I and Division II. I want to tell you something that's frightening, okay? Every time I leave a school, I tell the athletes, and I usually do all the student athletes, ladies, men, the whole bit, and I tell them, listen, if you got a gambling problem, email me and give my email address or Facebook me, Twitter, whatever you want. I said, I don't need to have your, I don't need to know your name. I don't need to know who you are. I don't work for the NCAA. I'm not part of enforcement. I just want to help you out. People, I want to tell you this. 300 and some odd schools, it has not failed yet. By the time I get back to my hotel room, I have emails from student athletes that are having trouble or having issues with gambling. And a lot of times they'll say my best friend or my cousin, or I don't want to say it's them. Okay? It has not failed yet. Why? Access. Before, back in my day, you had to go to a bookmaker. Today, you can do it on your phone. So many young students your age are getting in trouble for poker. Okay? I want to tell you a scary story. University of Wisconsin, not too long ago, okay? Young man, 19 years old, okay, flees to New York. Some of you might have heard this. They catch up with him in New York. He murdered 3 people. 3 people, okay? They questioned him. What happened? He had a gambling problem, okay? They asked him this, very, very telling. Listen to this. They said to him, when did you start gambling? He said, quote, I never gambled a day in my life until I came to college and started playing penny poker with my friends. He said, it got into me. He said, I had more money than them. He was an Asian kid. He had a lot of money. He said, and I needed to raise the stakes. He hooks up with this guy who supposedly was a good handicapper on sports. And the guy told him, hey, I'll give you the bets. We'll split the money, right? They asked the kid, well, what was the first bet you ever made, on a sports team? He said, the Atlantic Braves. He didn't even know the name of the team. He didn't know nothing about it, right? What happens? He's gambling with this guy, and he loses $70,000, 7-0. His tuition, everything that his parents had sent, $70,000. He goes crazy. He goes looking for this kid. He finds him in the middle of the night. He's in a bedroom sleeping with 2 other guys. All of a sudden, this kid becomes a real criminal. He kills the guy that he was gambling with, and he didn't want any witnesses, so they killed the other 2 kids. They were innocent. Had nothing to do with it. Okay? Okay? I went on Jim Rome show, and I talked about this. And that night, it just happened to be coincidental. That night, I get back to my house, and I get an email from a person in Wisconsin. They say, Mike, we heard you on Jim Rome. That story got a little worse today. What happened? The kid was so distraught, he hung himself in his jail cell. Okay? 4 deaths started with penny poker. Gets worse. Okay? The brother of one of the kids in the room that was killed was so distraught over losing his brother that he killed himself. 5 deaths. Look it up. University of Wisconsin. 5 deaths started with penny poker. Now that's pretty dramatic, but I can sit here the rest of the night and tell you stories. You want to talk about drug addiction? I can talk to you all night. I've been around drug addicts, gambling addicts, you name it, I've been around it. I have seen more people struggle and suffer over gambling than I have with drugs or alcohol or anything else. Because it creeps up on you. You don't realize it. All of a sudden, you don't have signs right away. But all of a sudden, it gets into you, and it's just as addicting as anything else. It's serious. So I caution you, some of us, we don't know what our capacity is. We don't think, I can gamble a little bit, I can give up smoking, I can drinking. You know what? You don't know. If you get hooked, it could be very serious and very dangerous. And it's happening a lot.
This is helpful.
Yes.
One last question.
Okay. It's actually, okay, I had 2 questions, but it's fine.
Go ahead, that's all right.
Okay,
I'm going to pull rank on Marvin here. Go ahead, get
cool. The first question is, you've been talking a lot about honor when you were a part of the family. And first of all, how would you have defined honor when you were still a member of the family working, you think? And then how is that different now as a believer? And then the second question is just how the 5 families interact today, where everything's a little more public, and at least in my mind, backroom deals and interactions would be tougher in an internet age than it might have been several decades ago. So kind of how much interaction is there between families, or cooperation instead of competition?
Okay, first question. How do I define honor when I was a member of that life? Well, it's like I said, you honor, you never disrespect a made guy, okay? Meaning that you can never raise your voice, you can never curse him out, you can never raise your hands to another made guy. That's instant death. You treat women and children the right way. You have a deal, you shake hands on it, you keep your word. I mean, that's the honor. We had to. We never wrote anything down. Everything was a handshake, and you had to keep your word. So, that was honor back then, just doing the right thing and conducting yourself in the right way, trying to have some integrity. Yes, we were killers, honestly, but we looked at that in an honorable way. Hopefully I defined it properly. How do I define honor now? I have a relationship with Jesus, and I just try to live as best as I can, and I fail, obviously. I can never live up to that. But, I treat my wife with respect. I love my wife very much. Treat my kids respectfully, and I try to interact with people the right way and do what I feel, God wants me to be doing in this life, and that's honorable. As far as how the 5 families interact now, understand something. Families compete with one another, but they also get along with one another. We always had arguments. When I say arguments, sit down like negotiations and try to work things out. And, whenever you hear about people getting killed in that life, it's never one family warring against another. It's always within the family. It's always a civil war. Who wants to be boss? Who don't want to give it up? It's stuff like that. So the same thing is going on now. I mean, the families were depleted for a while, but I'll tell you what happened in New York. When I was running the streets back then, they had 1,200, almost 1,300 agents, FBI agents, assigned to all 5 families. And you had 750 guys. So 1,300, almost double, right? Today, on the same number of 5 families, they have 120 agents. Why? They took the pressure off, and now everybody's worried about terrorism, and rightfully so. So what's happening with the families? They're building up again. It's happening. And they're getting into new things. You know, the internet, you know, when they look at the internet, all right, how can we defraud somebody on here? And, you know, they'll get some genius maybe like you, and, you know, you start to do your bidding because, let me tell you something, guys in the street, they're pretty savvy. You know, if you would have met me when we were in a club sometime, you know, we probably would have got along, you know. They're pretty savvy. They know how to work people. They know how to get into things. You got to understand something. And then I'll end it with this. The mafia in this country succeeded and prospered for over 100 years under some very tough conditions. I mean, we had politicians tied up. We were into every fabric of society. We had the Teamsters Union. You know what that means? Teamsters Union has 2.5 million members and hundreds of millions of dollars. We control that. We call a strike on Teamsters, no product is delivered anywhere in the country. Every truck stops, nothing goes anywhere. We control the seaports, okay? We call a strike on the seaports, no product comes in to that ship and no ship goes out. That's it. The country's at a standstill. We controlled that, okay? That was powerful. And all these other gangs and everything, you take the Mexican Mafia, they're powerful, no doubt about that. You take the drugs away from them, they're done. They got nothing. They're all built around the drug business, every single one of them. You take even the pagans and, you know, these motorcycle gangs, you take that away, they got nothing. It's done. Now, I'm not diminishing them. They're a powerful group because they got zillions of dollars. The drug stuff is big. But so, you know, you never sell them short because they're committed. And some of the guys are very bright, and they'll be a force to reckon with for certainly throughout my lifetime. Who knows what happens after that? Now, yes, more informants on the street because the government has a bigger arsenal of weapons. This racketeering law is horrible. You know, you spit on a sidewalk practically, you get 20 years. There's no more parole. You get 20, you're doing 17 and a half. A lot of guys won't stand up under that kind of time. So, you know, the weapons are there, but guys are building up again. So. This was great. Thank you very much. I'm glad I made the trip from, this morning, I just want you to know where I was a keynote speaker at the prayer breakfast in the Senate building in the John F. Kennedy room. Now, that was wonderful. The people were so wonderful. We got a tour of the building. It was really great. But a little trivia, I was the only mob guy, former mob guy, that went into that building that wasn't testifying against their own. I was the only guy that wasn't an informant. I was testifying on behalf of Jesus, not against my former associates. So that was a highlight of my ministry.
And Patrick Henry has now had a mob guy as one of your instructors. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. You good? Thank you.